Good evening. I'm David Traum, co-founder of Save Our Sites. Tonight we're having our annual spring special lecture. William Whitaker of the Penn Archives is going to give the talk. The title of his talk is Lost in the City of Brotherly Love, Louis Kahn's Vanishing Philadelphia Legacy. Let me just a few remarks. Of course, Louis Kahn is a world famous architect. He's one of the greatest architects of the 20th century. However, his fame has kind of come and gone in cycles. Uh, Very famous in the 70s and 80s. It was kind of in the background a little bit, and then there were various museum shows, and it came back into the forefront. So that's the way it goes, okay, with all of us, really. Fame is very fleeting, very evanescent, but Save Our Sites wants to keep the flame and the fame of Louis Kahn alive and very much in the forefront, and that's one of the reasons for this lecture tonight. This is the third lecture program that Bill Whitaker has conducted on Louis Kahn. Bill really it goes without introduction. I think almost everyone here tonight knows about it, but I will just make a very brief introduction. William Whitaker, Bill Whitaker is the curator of the Architectural Archives at the University of Pennsylvania, the Stuart Weitzman School of Design. He has a book of his own. It is written with author George Marcus. The book is The Houses of Louis Kahn, published in 2013 by Yale University Press. So I will now turn the evening over to Bill Whitaker. Bill?
Thank you, David. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And I just want to thank David for, he's asked me a couple times to just reflect on Kahn's work in Philadelphia, the status of things, more or less from a preservation point of view. And I think the work we do here at the Architectural Archives, which holds Kahn's archives, and that's, an important resource for scholarship, for learning, for education, for conservation. But as a place where we're able to talk about why architecture matters and what it contributes to the quality of place, and what are the things that architects and landscape architects are thinking about when they create those places, and how do we bring that sense of energy and dedication and spirit into the larger conversation about why places matter and why maybe we should engage with questions of preservation and maybe reflecting on the value of certain sites before they're gone, before they've been neglected or degraded so much that they're not there anymore. And so it's also interesting for David to ask me to, this started out was just talk about the demolished buildings, which seems kind of depressing. But on the other hand, some of the buildings were demolished before I ever had a chance to see them. And just the idea of walking around those spaces and how you might go about doing that, even though the building's not here anymore, is an interesting opportunity. And also just to reflect on those mechanisms of change that maybe cause buildings or landscapes to disappear or to change. I mean, that larger idea that change is inevitable is an important value in this. And so let me see. I'll share a screen and we'll get going. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 4 buildings. The AFL-CIO Health Center, the buildings there's actually 2 of them for the Philadelphia Psychiatric Hospital, the Mill Creek, and Lou Kahn and Esther Kahn's own house on Clinton Street. I would assume that most of you coming out for a lecture that's about Kahn's demolished buildings know something about Kahn and would have a sense of interest in him. But, he was born in Europe, in Estonia particularly, and emigrated when he was a young boy to Philadelphia in 1906. He grew up in the immigrant slum area of Northern Liberties, and his family was constantly moving in those first years of his life here in Philadelphia. sometimes moving more than once to stay one step ahead of the rent collector, as people say. He was educated in Philadelphia schools and was fortunate to be recognized as talented enough to be admitted to the Philadelphia Industrial Arts School, which was a kind of a magnet school for bringing art into the lives of children, the making of things into the lives of children. So, one day a week he was drawing, they were carving in wood, they were learning dexterity in drawing by drawing with both hands. So it was a wonderful starting off point, and it was a way for him to make friends as a young boy. English was not his first language. He had rubella, scarlet fever when he was young, so his voice was always squeaky. And maybe you guys are well aware, and you can see a bit in this photo, the facial scars, which were caused by burns he suffered when he was a young boy of just a year or two. And so those things maybe conspired to make him feel a little bit outside, but the gift he had of drawing drew others to him, and was a source of inspiration about what he was going to do with the rest of his life. So it was in high school where he was imagining he was going to wind up being a musician, a composer, but it was in that last semester or last year where he took a class on architecture, and that really, as he said, hit him between the eye and the eyeball, and drew him into architecture. So 4 years here at Penn, studying under Paul Cray, brought him to, in a sense, one of the best schools of architecture in the country. It was also, Philadelphia is an exciting city, the Parkway, and a lot of the transformation that was going on in Philadelphia, where that kind of industrial age that rose up in Philadelphia was certainly a center of in the late 19th century, early 20th century. The city boosters and city government were transforming the city and modernizing, in a sense, by deindustrializing the center of the city, moving those heavy industries out to places like Essington, and then building the Ben Franklin Parkway, building a set of institutions along the Parkway that would transform the civic life of the city. And Kahn grew up in that milieu and in that realm, and benefited greatly from it. Like a lot of architects, he's getting his practice started in apprenticeship. So he works for William Lee, the great movie theater architect. The Anthony Wayne Theater out in Wayne is an example. Sedgwick up in Mount Airy too, of projects that we know Lou Kahn worked on while in the employment of Lee. Travel in Europe followed, where he's seeing some of the great monuments of antiquity, the vernacular, which was much a topic of much interest amongst architects at that time. But he's also seeing modernism. He's seeing some of the Dutch modernism that was emerging in the mid-1920s, the kind of functionalist work, and also the kind of national romantic work in places like Stockholm with their city hall. But maybe not Corbusier, and maybe not Mies van der Rohe. But certainly the interest in visiting Holland meant that there was an interest in housing. A few years working for his teacher and his great mentor, Paul Cray, brought him to the 1930s, which of course is the Depression. And in that era, who's got a job, who can actually, is able to work. So he's unemployed for much of the next decade, finding work in housing projects, small jobs here or there, collaborating with other young architects to speculate and think about the future. But this is really where he focuses in, and for a period of time really is embracing modernism, learning anew, delving into housing, and establishing himself before really building very much. His partnership with George Howe and a little bit later Oscar Stoneroff kind of sets the stage for the future, where housing projects in the cause of preparing for what would become World War II really it starts his national renown. And with the conclusion of World War II, a return to Europe and a visit to the American Academy in Rome as an architect in residence brought him back to the ancient world. And with a bit of experience and maybe a different set of eyes, he sees the legacy of classicism in a different framework and brings, in a sense, a new life to it. And among his Philadelphia contemporaries, really brings a new level of thinking about where modernism is going to go into the future. And that kind of sets the stage for what happens in the 50s and the buildings that we're going to start seeing in a moment. But it's his work really at the Yale University Art Gallery that begin to draw attention to him. It's a building that he received the commission for just as he was starting back from Europe. And that sense of monumentality is seen for the first time. A building that's designed between 1951 and opened in 1954. And so, he's teaching at Penn after starting up at Yale with his teaching. So by 1954, 53, actually 53 is his first teaching at Penn. That's that moment where Holmes Perkins has come to Philadelphia. They're establishing a new curriculum, a new focus of teaching here at Penn in that time period. And yeah, so let's take a look at a few buildings. So the context around which Kahn is starting in this period, working with Oscar Stronoroff, there's a lot of interest and a lot of work around unions, projects in New Jersey for the Jersey homesteads, little buildings for battery operator unions in North Philly on Allegheny Avenue and elsewhere, meant there was a nexus of projects around unions and a potential place where he has his clients, he can get clients. Also among medical services, Lou's wife, Esther, was in the medical field. And so some of Kahn's earliest clients are physicians, are doctors, are involved with psychiatric concerns. His Philadelphia Psychiatric Hospital will come in that way as well. So the AFL-CIO Medical Services building is both, a confluence of the interest among his clients in the union work and in healthcare. The building itself is commissioned in 1954, and that's at a time where Kahn still has really, he's not done a lot of building. So his client, Dr. Melamed, is somebody who's kind of putting his trust in an architect who, relatively speaking, is somewhat untested, which is also interesting. So, but let's take a walk around the building, because this is a building that was demolished in Kahn's lifetime. We'll get to the reasons in a moment. But demolished starting in July of 1973, and basically it took about 25 days to wipe this building out, after only about 15 or 16 years of use. So here's a screen grab from Google Street View, and you're standing at Juniper Street and Flower looking north, and you can see the Packard building up ahead. So if we flash back in time, and here's a beautiful shot from 1961 from the city archives, where you're looking up Juniper Street. I couldn't help but pause and reflect on this little light industrial building that was built, at the turn of the century, but it appears as if the facade was renewed sometime in 1936. I couldn't find the architect involved, but the Rapid Electrotype company took over in the 1940s, and here it is, still a going concern in the early 1960s. So flipping the other direction, we can get a view of Kahn's building kind of from the side facade, and we see how a sense of reflection is an important quality of the building. The color difference really creates a dynamic note against the older buildings on this small back street, if you will. Partly darkened by history and by the industries of the area. And moving a little bit closer in, this is not as quite a high resolution image, but here you see a little bit more of that sense of reflection. I would just point out the strong horizontal elements incorporated within the facade, denoting the floor levels of the building, but giving kind of a wonderful sense of weight and character to the building. Those elements, the horizontal elements, are in fact stainless steel, and are some of Kahn's first experiments with brake metal, with using a system of bending the metal into a particular shape that would become a really important element in his architecture from this point on. This is really the first project where he got to experiment with stainless steel. And this is integrated throughout the building, including the sinks used throughout. It's a medical building, so there's sinks everywhere. And infilling between the windows and the window units there are also custom stainless steel, are a granite a granite element, kind of a granite cladding. And we see how the surface of that granite is highly polished. Years later, Kahn would use a similar sort of granite on the Four Freedoms Park, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and not choose to polish or hone the surface of that for really good reasons. So the idea that, and Kahn reflected on Mies and the idea of God being in the details, these little nuanced choices between polished and honed or wire sawn, the choice of the stainless steel, which in its own way has a sense of reflection, is important. The drawings for the buildings survive in the architectural archives here at Penn. We really just have the set of construction drawings and one early presentation drawing, but a very elegant facade drawing for the Juniper Street elevation here. And you can see in the lower right-hand side of the drawing at the ground floor, you can see where there's areas 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas where there ought to be the stainless steel windows and there's not. So what's interesting there is Kahn actually left openings in the facade to a covered parking area. So you could actually move into the volume of the building, although still being outside, passing through the facade, a really kind of interesting effect to a small little side street. Pulling out, and now we're standing kind of in the middle of Vine Street, looking back towards the south along Juniper Street. And we see the kind of flushness of the facade, the granite and the glass elements, and then the protrusion of that water table denoting the floor levels. And I can't help but kind of pivot a little bit to the left to reveal the building opposite Kahn's AFL Health Center, which at this point featured Chancellor Records, and that's a production company that were managing Fabian and frankly Avalon. The company was doing very well in the 1960s, around the time that this photograph was taken. These are all the kind of buildings that were in this area and were affected by the dramatic changes that were coming that would ultimately result in the demolition of AFL as well. Turning and looking along that facade and just considering the qualities of reflection that were of interest to Kahn in this urban atmosphere, in this urban location, how one enlivens a building and relates it to the street or for the passerbyers, either through, in a car or whatnot. Stepping back, this is a photo by one of the architectural historians that taught here at Penn in the 1970s and 80s, David Van Zanten, a scholar on Beaux-Arts architecture, so somebody who actually spoke to Kahn and interviewed Kahn and reflected on the impact of a Beaux-Arts education in Kahn's creativity. Here, taking a photograph of this building from the other side of Vine Street, probably just a few months, short months before the building was to be demolished. And you could see how that record company building is already gone. The building to the west, which was a high-rise or multi-story, maybe about a 9-story industrial building, has already been demolished. This is, just weeks, obviously, before Kahn's building comes down. And again, returning to one of the drawings here at Penn of the Vine Street elevation, where you could see the lower 2 levels being given over to full sheets of glass. And then the upper 2 floors, where there's various types of record keeping and office spaces on the 3rd floor, and then on the top floor is the boardroom for the health center, and they had multiple locations, but this was their central location. And this wonderful photograph taken by John Ebstel, who was a photographer that Kahn often turned to photograph his architecture in this period of time, really giving a sense of the quality of that lower level space. Really, it's the heart of the building, is this idea of this entry space, and Kahn's idea that it couldn't just be a simple space, a simple, efficient space. It needed to be something that was dignified and something more. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And to the right of the image, you can see that 6 or 7-story industrial building that had been taken down in the previous shot. Here's the building, flags flying on the day of its dedication in 1957. A crowd gathered, a rainy day, much like today. And the quality of reflection that one is experiencing when the weather is different. So that idea that's so much a part of Kahn's architecture is the response of materials to the detailing, to the building, to the qualities of changing light throughout the course of the day and the year. You're seeing an interesting variation on it in a very urban environment. And then a little bit later, where you see the building in one of the city archives photos, aged a little bit, and they filled in what was initially a parking area, which we'll see a little bit more. And then this wonderful photograph by the historian Richard Longstreth, where he's got the camera down at eye level. I'll just point out the previous shots seem to have made a point of elevating the building or elevating the view for photography. I like this one very much because you get a sense of the presence of the building and how it sits on the ground and how it opens itself up. And so we're moving around to the main entrance. And I think often the curtains were drawn here. Most of the photos after the opening show the curtains drawn. So maybe seeing the passing by traffic wasn't something that was very embraced, let's say, on the interior, but you do get a sense of the life and the movement of the city around as a quality that Kahn was interested in. And here is a rendering which survives only in photographic form. And you get a sense of that quality of transparency within the building, how the cladding, the granite, starts to infill in interesting ways. But then inside, there's a very clear sense of structure, particularly in the floor floor slab. The structure is concrete. It's a concrete frame. And while Kahn had certainly built using concrete, especially at the Yale Art Gallery, this is exploring and developing the ideas of servant-served space. In other words, giving places for systems, mechanical systems, electrical systems that allow people who use the building to know that they're there, to understand their place. So it's a kind of storytelling or description of why things are the way they are in a building. I like how he's showing individuals engaging at ground level, being given glimpses into the building, and then this rather extraordinary element at the corner, kind of where you can see the three trees at the right-hand side, a series of kind of free-floating walls, kind of taking the elements, which in one area are the granite cladding slabs, becoming kind of freestanding monoliths that start to kind of give a sense of defining the entrance and approach to the building. The idea of detaching a facade and in the way that one might think of as a ruin, something Kahn would talk about just a few years later in his work at the Salk Institute, particularly the Meeting House. Here we see it in kind of a nascent form. And then looking up at that corner at some of the detailing of the stainless steel, quite elegantly rendered. So a nice simple corner view where you can see that entrance space and the structure revealed because the curtains are not drawn. Moving a little bit closer in, you could see that area that was initially given over to parking, so that you would actually pull in underneath the building and park there. Renderings show, revealed trees there. Obviously, that was something that somewhere in the discussion didn't happen. And, within a few years, that lower area would ultimately be enclosed and be given over to other uses. But at least initially, it was a space that was open to the street and was part of the arrival. And here's a photo looking across to Juniper Street through the building, and you're seeing some of the cladding kind of framing the older buildings in the street beyond. I think that's kind of interesting and different, really kind of getting a sense of Kahn's urbanity and how he's seeing the building relate to those elements. And then also just looking at the top of this slide and seeing the reflections of the world around. So a slide that's not in particularly good condition, but showing the entrance once again, and the bollards being presented with just some nice bright color. And this wonderfully detailed little entrance canopy, again, exploiting the possibilities of stainless steel. Here are just some folded plates using that same technique of brake metal. And then drawing us into the door handles, and then finding amongst the drawings at Penn, where we've got about 70 or 80 construction drawings, the detailing of that door handle. And so as one walks inside, you get this this entrance. And one of the things that we have, because the building was demolished, is Kahn reflecting on some of its values in an interview with Victoria Donahoe, who was that wonderful art critic and architecture critic for the Inquirer for many years, a longtime resident of Narberth, really a wonderful spirited lady who I got to know a little bit and really admired very much. She interviewed Kahn around the time the building was demolished. And, Kahn explained this room and why it was important. So I want to read to you what he said of this space. It couldn't have just a simple entrance, speaking of the building. It had to be a very friendly and generous entrance just because the users were working people, and you can call them poor people. Instead of giving them just enough, it was felt that it had to be as close as possible to entering a palace. This just had to be, because it was their place. It wasn't something given to them, but through their own faith in joining the union and the strength they got from it, they readily accepted, at least in my mind, this is Kahn talking, a rather noble entrance, far more noble than was necessary, which which proved to be the right solution. So this idea of having a beautiful, bright, well-lit room, a place where you could sit and you could converse with someone, or you could also turn away from the situation. The structure of the space is revealed within that room, and you get the full palette of the materials of the building. Turning and looking back at the primary entrance through that vestibule, and then looking to the ceiling in that space. And then in a color shot, again, a not very clean slide, but this talk gave me the opportunity to comb far and wide the imagery to see what I could find. You get a little bit of a sense of the reduced spare palette of materials. So kind of maybe a calm, sedate space where the people gathered there together are what bring the space to life. And then a black and white photo showing the cast in place concrete elements and these trusses, these beams and joists intersecting and allowing spaces elsewhere in the building primarily to be routing the mechanical systems of the building, the heating, the ventilation, the cooling, and other utilities in the spaces dedicated to where the examination rooms were, the physical therapy rooms, the laboratory rooms, and so on. And here's another one, a detail of one of the construction drawings showing the reflected ceiling plan at the second level, where you get a sense of the structural grid of the building, primarily composed of a series of roughly 27-foot square structural units. And I just want to draw your attention to the left-hand side of the drawing, and where I've marked in the corners, top and bottom in the red, where the columns in that room, in the kind of entrance room, are pulled in a little bit, allowing the corner to open up. This is what creates some of the dynamism in that space, along with a projecting balcony that accounts for 1/3 kind of cantilevering in to that space. And we'll return to an image of that in a moment. But I just want to point out that 26-foot grid is something David mentioned, the book I wrote on Kahn's houses. That 26-foot grid is something that translates into the domestic spaces of projects, although unbuilt, the Adler-Devore houses. Both used a 26-foot grid. This is 27, so it's slightly bigger. But I wonder if he's not accounting for some sense of domesticity in that, or perhaps conversely, or thought in a different way, how he's using the grid and a certain size of grid and thinking about the variations within the grid, and then developing that using servant served and other construction techniques to think about his vocabulary of architecture moving forward. Here's a reflected ceiling plan farther up where you get a sense of the richness of vocabulary of the beams and joists within that 27-foot module, and just getting a sense of the core of the building, where the utility, the vertical circulation, the mechanical systems are all routed up and through the building and distributed through that network of embedded within the structural floor system. But here's really one of the, I think, most beautiful photos that I've seen of this building, but also I think of any space by Kahn. Again, it's by John Epstein, who was a really talented photographer who shot many of Kahn's buildings into the late 1950s, early 1960s. And he's put the camera a little bit high, and you get a sense of the balcony projecting in, the order of that space. You see the inscription in the granite. Here it looks like it's gilded, kind of giving a sense of that this was a place built for and by and with the support of the members of the union. At the center of the photograph, you see where the elevators are and how it moves up and through the building. But those inscriptions in the elevators, that's the structural core and the mechanical core of the building. And at the top, you see that ceiling beautifully rendered. And in that one space, there's a little bit of a drop, and you see there's a light. And that, in fact, is where the mechanical systems and the distribution systems for the mechanical in that space are revealed or are contained. And the rhythm of light and dark within the facade that we see at the end, granite panels versus the metal, the stainless steel of the glazing, you kind of get the rhythm almost of Greek architecture embedded in that, but clearly rendered within a modern structural form. So what causes the building's demise? Well, the highways and new movement systems within the city and dealing with suburbanization and getting people back to the city. So here is the future as Philadelphia planners see it in 1954, around the time that the building was commissioned, showing the initial leg of the Vine Street Expressway extending from the Schuylkill through to 16th or 17th Street, dug in a channel through the city, but coming up to grade level before Broad Street. And much of the work you see indicated in the triangular space between Market Street and the Parkway and the river are actually designs of Kahn that were initially conceived of as part of the Better Philadelphia exhibition. And here's a drawing showing the comprehensive plan for expressways in Philadelphia. This actually dates from right around the time that the AFL building was demolished, showing the completed Vine Street Expressway, but indicating many other highways in dotted lines that never came to fruition, that would have cut through Fairmount Park, would have sliced through Cobb's Creek Park, would have upended much of South Street and the Northeast. None of those dotted lines, I think, were ever completed. But the progress of addressing questions of movement and infrastructure in the city drew support politically and financially through the federal government to extend Vine Street to the Benjamin Franklin Bridge and to connect it with I-95. Part of the impetus for this was the coming bicentennial. So it's recognized that the expressway will level scores of buildings. By 1966, they're beginning to show that, and they really need a 31-foot margin, particularly on the south side of Vine Street, in order to enable this. Here's a detail of that, and you can see I've highlighted where the AFL Medical Services building, basically that 27-foot grid, you're taking off the first bay of the building, along with many of the other structures along the south side of Vine. Here's an aerial photograph where I've indicated with the yellow lines where that channel is essentially cut. At the very bottom, the very bottom block is Juniper. So the margin at the bottom of the slide is Juniper Street. This is prior to the construction of AFL building. And you can see why the alignment of the north side holds true, because it's where the monumental buildings along the north side of Logan Circle stand. The Free Library and the Family Court. And there it is in a view today, with the star where the AFL-CIO building is. That area is essentially a series of empty lots at this point. So it did not go unnoticed that Kahn's building was going to be demolished, and there were people speaking about why the building had cultural significance and artistic value. Looking in towards the east, I'll just point out the demolition of the AFL building and its loss has a context of other buildings that were lost. Among them, many of the settlement houses and other structures that were supporting Philadelphia's Skid Row area, and also the Chinese Catholic Church, the Holy Redeemer Church, by the Daggett family. And the community around Chinatown fought this, and they've been penned in and challenged in many different ways. But this is one instance where, despite the approval of the Vine Street Expressway in the beginning of construction, the Chinese community stuck to it, and you could see where Holy Redeemer was initially cited, and the encroachment upon Chinatown on the other side. They were eventually able to prevail, but here is the notice that Kahn's building is actually going to be demolished. Chinatown continuing to fight it, ultimately even piling themselves onto a pile of debris in protest, which resulted in an environmental impact study revisions of the plan for the highway and the retention of their church. But here is that article I read from, where Kahn spoke about the building and its demise to Victoria Donahue. But I just want to, read another little segment of it before moving on to the rest of my talk. So here's Kahn reflecting on the building, after its demolition. On a very bright day, the sun did good things for it. Kahn recalled, speaking of the reflection of the sky and that passerbyers could see in the building, and its shaded replication of the passing traffic, including a muted reflection of the gleam of sunlight on chrome. Kahn then said, "I wished Philadelphia would always be sunny." But he added, "There is a lesson in the building. The most valuable part of a man's work is that it doesn't belong to him. A man is better than his works. I learned that a great deal from doing that building. It introduced myself to stainless steel. I always did like what didn't have to be painted." He also learned to use stone in the exterior sheathing, he said. Okay, so I was most interested in AFL because it was a building that I really had not experienced and thought about very much. So I've got a few more examples, but these will go a little bit more quickly. But I'm basically taking you through them in the order of their demolition. So about 30 years after AFL is demolished, we see the demise of the Mill Creek Housing Project. This was an extensive public housing project that emerged in the early 1950s out of a series of area plans commissioned by the City Planning Commission under Ed Bacon, along with the Redevelopment Authority. Kahn's great contribution here and in previous plans, particularly at the East Poplar redevelopment, was the idea of introducing greenways into urban renewal projects, and also the idea of rehabilitation. So the idea of looking closely at what is there, selectively choosing elements to be retained and restored or to be adaptively reused, to creating connective tissue in small back streets and other elements, providing other systems of movement throughout the city, and particularly the urban redevelopment area, while providing housing for the great immigrations that were coming up, mostly of African Americans from the South into the urban centers and industrial centers of the Northeast and Midwest. Here's a wonderful diagram by Kahn from early on showing this sense of connection of institutions, churches, schools, to the housing areas, and then a ground level view of people engaging within the shelter of a grove of trees, and the way in which that plays a role in urban experience. and then from the master plan report from the early 50s, where you see a greenway established along Aspen Street, and then paralleling, I think, 43rd is a set of greenways connecting high rises, low rises with existing structures, but then on to playing fields and other park spaces along the way. And then some of the public housing in the first phase, where glazed white bricks and concrete are the primary material palette, which I would say on the interior of the AFL-CIO, that was the material palette. So maybe this is part of a common vocabulary from that time period. And I would just point out, among the things Kahn was able to see when he visited Europe in 1950-51, besides Egypt and Greece and the great monuments, he slipped in a little side trip to see Corbusier's Unité de Habitation in Marseille, still under construction. So the kind of combination of infill and larger concrete elements maybe is evident in these buildings. But I want to focus in on, just briefly, the community building. And I think it's a building that David Traub is very fond of. And I have to say, I never went in this building. I think I never took the time to drive around or walk around. And I love this drawing because it shows a clustering of rooms around a central circulation space. Each room serves kind of a different purpose for gathering or assembly. And then those four spaces then open out onto an additional four cubes, which are really are garden spaces or plaza spaces. So these are kind of community spaces outside the building for sculpture, for lawn, for fountain, for different kinds of gathering. And here in a more diagrammatic format, showing the different elevations or floor elevations, where you're able to get up and down and use or introduce a sense of topography. So looking at that, I couldn't help but think about, again, one of his last buildings, the For Freedom Park, the Roosevelt Memorial, where just the simple monumentality of raising the landscape up, giving a sense of profile. So just raising the ground level 12 feet and then sloping down to the room, this combination of a garden and a room or a landscape in a building as an integral element of urban space and urbanism we see in many projects, but here in the community building. And I'll just point to the way in which he's combining squares, but then the dynamic way in which he's structuring the support of the roof with four very clearly articulated columns, kind of in a pinwheel format, that opens up a square in the center of each of those rooms, which creates an opportunity for a clear story lighting from above. Here is a more detailed plan of those spaces. And then from the inside, a construction shot of one of those rooms. I think this is the the sequence of rooms that face that garden space of outdoor rooms. And here you can see precast elements. We see how there's precast and post-tension beams, precast slabs up top. And then in the exterior, series of precast systems for kind of light sun shading roofs that were precast throughout the buildings, and kind of created a unified architectural vocabulary in precast elements. And at the top of the building, you can see these kind of cupolas that pop up and provide that indirect lighting into those spaces. I have never found a as-built photograph of those interiors. So I really have no sense of the character of those interior rooms. And here up in that elevated space where you have these series of plazas, not quite as spirited in execution as the drawing suggested, where green spaces, water spaces maybe would have animated this more. But I will point out Cornelia Oberlander was the landscape architect working on this with Kahn. So another example, which is really not a Kahn building, but I thought it worth just touching on very briefly, the Coward Shoe Store, demolished in 2014 on the 1300 block of Chestnut Street. Much of that block has been demolished in the past decade and rebuilt in the way that we build in Philadelphia now. But this is really a building that is the work of Oscar Stoneroff. It came at the time that Stoneroff and Kahn were parting ways, and this was a job that Stoneroff carried with him. But still, I would point to that sense of the glazed facade, the kind of openness, the way it contrasts old and new, kind of establishing a vocabulary that, in a sense, was somewhat ubiquitous among modern architects in cities around America at this time. But I like how the structural system is pulled back a bit. The facade is given over to just the kind of articulation of the frame, and that push and pull of structure and cladding is part of the vocabulary here. And I will point out that actually Stoneroff and Kahn, they are just redoing the facade. Just a few feet behind is a much earlier building from the turn of the century that was integrated with a theater. This was a flanking building done by Bruce Price, who you guys would better know better as one of the architects doing great shingle style arts and crafts houses in Tuxedo Park. In a sense, an inspiration for people like Frank Lloyd Wright. So another example, moving ahead to 2018 and also 2022, are the Philadelphia Psychiatric Hospital. This is in the city of Philadelphia, but right out near the city line on the Belmont Plateau. This is an area that was a golf course in years prior and was given over to institutions at the edge of the city, among them the psychiatric hospital. And the client is someone who was introduced to Kahn through his wife, Esther. There's actually two buildings here. The first one is the Pincus building, which was a kind of a rehabilitation building, beautifully rendered by Kahn, where you see the indoor-outdoor spaces, the place of trees, sitting areas, the gathering of people, and the depth of the facade, here providing some sense of sun shading, here in a slightly more refined rendering, still with some sense of a grove of trees, a connector, an outdoor connector providing shelter, moving from the kind of residential part of the hospital into this therapy building. As built in photographic form, these photos don't only survive in published form, so they're scanned out of a magazine. And we can see here how Kahn introduces an interesting way of modifying the facade with large panels operating like a double hung window that you could push up, pull the glazing down to the ground level, and push the opaque system up. You could open the facade up, allowing activities to spill out if weather permitted. And here you could see one of the larger spaces for gathering and activities, pool, bingo maybe. You can see there's a television, built-in speaker. But I'm really interested in the steel frame and the lightweight steel frame and the way in which Kahn lowers, it's a 15-foot tall space. He lowers the walls to maybe just above a door frame. So maybe we could say it's about 6'8", 7 foot high. And you get a sense of the articulation of structure. This is a building that dates in its design from 1951-52. So he's not really done concrete before. So it's interesting to see him experimenting with that lightweight metal truss framework and then stepping out from that circulation space into one of the therapy rooms. The second building is the Radbill building, which was a more formal structure in terms of its framework. It's distinguished by slate paneled infill between the concrete frame, and then this dramatic porte cochere, very structural, very kind of sculptural in its form. And you get a hint of the facade, but I'll get back to that in a minute. It's got kind of a pinwheel plan where you get one volume of office spaces and other types of rooms, and patient rooms heading in another direction, and then the physical plant with the boiler room, to the bottom. And here we see that porte cochere with the physical plant, always intended to be built upon and added to, but distinguished by the tall verticality of the mechanical space of the chimney. But you see that facade of the slate panels, not polished, left as kind of a raw color that is typical of slate, but this wonderful sense of sun shading on the south side of the building, kind of stepping back, and the windows, the heights of the windows kind of reducing as one goes up through the facade, a dead-on elevation of those elements, and then looking up through those. Those are terracotta chimney flues, kind of playfully incorporated into the cast slabs of the sunscreens, kind of bringing an interesting note of bioclimactic design in. And then the rear facade, which here I only ever saw with this kind of popcorn stucco. There were some failures on the original facade where the clips holding it to the backing, which I think was concrete block, began to fail. So one or two of the original slate infill elements popped off. So the hospital just quickly did this as a remediation effort. But this is a building that disappeared in 2022. Rumblings about its demise were occurring in February of 2020. So in that period when COVID pandemic occupied all of our attention and concern for others, this building progressed in its demise. But I think one would also just say that the dynamics of a healthcare facility, the needs of a community in a mental health facility maybe dictated that this was a building that was not long for the world. So I'm almost done. I just need a couple of minutes to wrap up. I've gone a little bit long, so bear with me for a moment. I just wanted to end with Luke Kahn and Esther Kahn's own house. This was the first time that Luke Kahn actually owned a house. And in fact, he never had his name on the deed. It was only in Esther's name. Maybe they knew something about his lack of financial acumen. But it's a building that was part of the Washington Square West. So it was an older structure which Kahn gently modified. And so I was able to include it in a special issue of the Japanese magazine A+U, and I was able to get A+U photographers in to photograph it before modifications happened. And here we see a wonderful little kitchen space that Kahn designed, and the section of the house gives you a sense of what was done. To the right-hand side of the drawing, you can see the existing structure. The staircase, which is in its original configuration on the second, third, and fourth floors, were originally pairs of bedrooms, and that Kahn was unifying those into suites with a new bathroom space in the middle. He took out what was a bathroom addition. This is towards the center of the building. You could see shown in a dotted line with a bit of a mansard roof where the bathrooms were located, kind of at the split levels, and then adding a modern kitchen at the back, a very modest structure. And then here in plan, you can see where making small tweaks to the vestibule, incorporating a closet before stepping into a living space, combining what were originally two separate spaces into a unified living dining space, and then where you see the kitchen and kind of breakfast area on the right-hand side, all of new construction in brick. The drawings detailing that out, showing the original cabinetry, wall hung and floating, so wall mounted. And then here in photographs that I was able to take standing alongside the Japanese photographers, where you see these utterly simple cabinets made with plywood with very simple poles. The cabinets up top allowed your hand just to come up underneath where lighting could be hidden and you could pull out the cabinets. And then the butcher block of the countertop on this side with a stainless steel sink. I'm afraid I don't have good photos of the other side, but the sink, stainless steel, is situated underneath this wonderful large window connecting you with the outside, and a few views of the inside of the house taken from the issue of A+U magazine, where you get a sense of that window. Just a lovely, simple little gesture. But I look at all these elements and I think about the simplicity of Shaker architecture. Kahn talking about whenever he was in doubt about what to do with respect to details or woodworking, he would turn to the Shaker. There were definitely a number of exhibitions at places like the Philadelphia Museum of Art that occurred at this moment in time. And there's going to be an exhibit on the Shakers at the ICA in 2026. So it's a theme we'll be able to return to. Kahn designed the lighting fixtures, and it's an element that he appreciated being able to design. You see the use of stainless steel, rather aluminum, but maybe learning some lessons that he began exploring at the AFL-CIO. A photo of one of those lighting fixtures deployed on the second floor in what was the primary suite of the house. But, the house was purchased, I think, in about 2010, 2012. And, here's what happens, when you update a kitchen. That wonderful sink underneath that big window becomes a seating area. Turning back, the cabinets are gone from that space. They're moved up to the third floor and incorporated into the spaces on the third floor. So they still exist, but here up on the very top floor is the last little bits, just kind of stilted up. And this is from a real estate photo in 2019. Who knows whether the people who bought it in 2019 knew that this was Kahn's house? Who knows if this is still there or it's been saved? Who knows if all those 25 lights, those little sconces that he made still survive? I don't. So I'm going to end it there. And I thank you for your patience. This was not really meant to be a lecture to tell you about all the history of Lou Kahn, so much as it was just to kind of, I think, as David pointed out in a very basic way, we cannot visit these spaces anymore. We can't walk through them anymore. We can't learn from them in that way that firsthand experience gives us. And certainly with the case of the AFL Medical Center, I really have a sense of regret not having actually seen the quality of the facade and its character as you might have experienced passing by at the street level in a sense of urbanism. And all you have to do, if you know Kahn's work, is think about that great late project, the Yale Center for British Art, to see a real kind of resonance with what the AFL-CIO building is all about. I didn't show you any of those things as comparison, because I think I wanted us to reflect on that sense of loss. And by just showing you what we cannot see now, maybe that's my point. So I thank you for your patience. I went a little bit long, but I'm happy to stay as long as as you guys have questions. So thank you.
Bill, yes, these buildings have been sadly demolished. We can't walk through them anymore. But tonight you have brought them back to life, okay, in a remarkable way, and maybe in a certain sense forever. And I believe that, Bill, you have created a very important document, okay, that has not existed in the Kahn literature. The discussion tonight about these 3 or 4 buildings. And we thank you very much. Save Our Sites and all of our friends and members, thank you for this discussion of unfortunately demolished buildings in Philadelphia. Now I want to introduce our staff member, David Soffa, who will now conduct the Q&A period. David? Okay,
Yeah, thanks so much, David, and thank you so much, Bill. That was a wonderful talk. And we have our first question from Judy. Judy says, I'd love to know how Kahn and Stoneroff got involved with the AFL and the ILGWU and other unions.
Well, I think it's the 1930s, and Stoneroff, in coming to America, he arrives around 1929. He brings a knowledge of housing and of contemporary approaches and thinking around the question of housing from Europe, but particularly Germany and Frankfurt, where, the Frankfurt kitchen, I mean, there's a lot of innovation going on there. And so in terms of housing projects, a lot of the unions were supporting that and were supporting better housing for union members. So part of the Jersey homesteads, which was not Stoneroff, it was Kahn working with Alfred Kastner, was the Lady Garment Workers Union out of New York City and a little bit of Philadelphia, kind of rethinking about where to situate a factory, how to improve workers' lives, how to make things better for people. So Stoneroff has strong connections to the unions. And Stoneroff is a brilliant designer. He's connected with a lot of, the really interesting progressive work in Europe. He knows Corbusier and his work of 1920, 1930. He's an editor for one of the first volumes of Corbusier's collected work. So he knows a lot. But in a sense, Kahn is the more, energized and engaged designer. He's the guy who sweats the details more than Oscar. That's not to put Oscar down in any way, shape, or form. But Oscar's someone who is engaged with the social dimension of architecture in a very kind of immediate and engaged way. So that kind of advocacy and social advocacy that one sees in Stoneroff's work, I think, is also something that engages with the unions. Stoneroff famously dies in a plane crash with Walter Reuther, the head of the United Auto Worker Union, flying back from a visit to a kind of a retreat center being built in Michigan for the Auto Worker Union at Black Lake. So Kahn also is, spending time associated with the unions. I've forgotten the name of it, but it was like a union retreat that almost had some socialist bent to it north of New York City. That Kahn.
No, it was Unity House, and it was in the Poconos.
That's correct. That's a project they did. That's correct. I'm thinking about something else.
Oh, that's one that they built a beautiful building there.
Yeah. Actually, you could see right there, right above me, where I'm pointing my finger, International Lady Garment Workers Union. That's from the facade of the Camp Unity House. So anyway, there's quite a bit of union related work, and it really just speaks to Stoneroff and Kahn having common cause with the concerns of the unions for the betterment of their members and how that could get expressed in architectural form. So that was an important nexus for Kahn's work, in this period of the 1940s and 50s. Less so later on. Stoneroff always stayed with it.
I also lived in the Schuylkill Falls housing project for a
By
little bit.
Stoneroff, yeah.
Yeah. So I have lots of little connections and did a lot of research. on
So
Oxford.
just to finish the idea of Camp Unity, that's up in the Poconos. William Lescaz did the first wave of building for
Yeah,
that.
that was gorgeous.
And I was able to trespass. So I shouldn't say that. I did trespass there, I want to say 20 years ago. And everything was kind of in a state of ruin or real serious dilapidation.
Yeah.
It was very sad making, some of it from the 30s and 40s. But the Kahn and Stoneroff, they did a building, basically a dormitory building for the Philadelphia members.
Mhm.
Very elegant building of stone and wood and clapboard siding. And I have no idea what the current status of all that stuff is, but it can't be good.
I have a whole video that I took walking through the whole campus years and years ago because I spent many, many, many summers there.
I would love you to share that with me at some point, but go through David and he can get you in touch.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Great. Max, I see you're back with us. You want to try one more time?
Yes, certainly. I just want to express my thanks for the information, but I'd like to express one of my fondest memories from my father was going to the AFL-CIO medical building. We lived from South Philadelphia. We took the subway up, which was I was like 8 or 9 years old, and even then, I was impressed by that building because everything was so old around it, but that sort of shined out. It was just a magnificent thing. And anyway, it was a very fond memory, and I was highly surprised that it's a Kahn building. I never knew that part. And I just want to express my thanks for that, bringing that vivid memory of my father and AFL-CIO. Thank you. That's it.
No, thank you for that. I mean, that's one of the things that, as someone who on a day-to-day basis works in an archive, I've done exhibits, I've done books. That's all fun. But engaging with people in the community who have direct experiences of these places, I think is among the most rewarding part of my job. So it's why I love doing these talks, because you guys help me see these places in ways that I would not otherwise be able to see for myself. So I really appreciate even just those little memories that you have. It gives you a sense of these places and the life that they had, even though they're long gone.
Okay, we have another question from Lee in the chat. What caused the Mill Creek demolition?
Most of the large scale housing projects done by the city of Philadelphia in the 50s, along Washington Avenue, the name is escaping me right now, Schuylkill Falls, Mill Creek, these were all places that were built with the best of intentions, but maybe, did not have the kind of maintenance that was required. They just were in a state that they were not viable in the future as far as the stakeholders were concerned. So these were buildings that, there were new mechanisms for financing new housing that came up at that point in time that basically saw the demolition of large swaths of public housing projects out of that initial post-war era, and then replacement with basically, suburban, single-family detached style housing, which now occupies those sites. So gone are, I think largely gone, if not completely, are those greenways that Kahn brought to the fore. And I don't think I actually connected this when I was talking, but those greenways and that sense of rehabilitation is really central to, it's a central idea that forms the foundation of Society Hill. What I remember, and I recall David Trow bringing up at the time that Mill Creek was going to come down, is like, the community building is a really great little building. Why don't they adaptively reuse that building? Why can't someone, see some or imagine some potential use for it? But there was not any interest in recognizing any of those values associated with that building.
Here's David Traub intervening, just talking about the demolition of Mill Creek. I mean, that was the time when high-rise towers for public housing were very out of favor. There were famously the Pruitt Towers in St. Louis were demolished. That was all over the news. So the Mill Creek Towers came down, but regrettably, the small scale, the two-story houses were demolished, and I regret that. I think that was a mistake, and particularly the community building, which I adore, was demolished unnecessarily for lack of imagination. Perhaps they just thought they would just kind of one full swoop demolish the whole shebang, and they did. So, but I think it was the towers, that the high-rise towers, that kind of, set the fire.
Great. We have a comment in the chat from Susanna, just remarking on the amazing photographs that were in your lecture. And I have to agree.
I think finding good images, partly that's part of being an archivist and being a collections person, and recognizing that there are views that are taken for marketing reasons, and that's one thing, but kind of understanding the life of buildings often requires a wider range of imagery. They're also invaluable in terms of preservation and for preservation purposes in understanding change over time. But finding good images are often what is required to help build support amongst communities of people who might find it difficult looking at a building that's not in good condition. A lot of the kind of mid-century buildings that are very kind of, plain or spare in their facade elements, particularly commercial buildings or retail buildings, often had really interesting signs or signage or little elements that really bring the facade to life. And those often are the ones that are removed almost immediately. So finding the shots that allow people to see that and to recognize some of the qualities of the building or the landscape when it was in a state where it was being maintained, or it maintained its character defining features in ways that were closer to the initial intent of the building. So and so it's really important to find good images. And often I seek out collections. I showed you a few slides from the historian Richard Longstreth. I agreed to take his photographic archive of 135,000 slides in 2016. The slide he kept the slides for 8 or 9 years, and we only received them here a year ago. Not even maybe a little bit less than a year ago. And we started processing them. So the AFL slide that he took, came to light. But he's someone who photographed extensively around the United States, but in Philadelphia in particular.
Yeah, it's such an amazing record of not only the buildings, but the buildings in those specific moments in time, and showing the accumulation of time on them.
I think, Gene Wolf, you've got to.
Okay. As someone who moved to the Philadelphia area in 1973, to me, seeing these early buildings of Kahn's was amazing, because I always had the sense that the only one that was still here or had even existed was what was on the campus.
Right.
And that obviously I was fooled. And I knew Sue Kahn, his daughter, before I even moved to Philadelphia. So I'm really curious, is that the home that she grew up in that you showed us a picture of?
No, that I think Lou and Esther moved into the Clinton Street house maybe as late as 67. And so
that was after.
For 30 years, he lived with his in-laws out on Chester. I I forget whether it's like 48th and Chester, something like that. And he would ride the trolley to Penn's campus, or he'd take the trolley to downtown Philly to get to work. So Sue grew up in the Esther's parents' house out on Chester Avenue in West Philly.
Okay. All right. That makes sense then, right? But it was just understanding the usage of the cast concrete and the stainless steel on his materials. I mean, it really gives you a full understanding of how his works developed from there when you think about whatever else has been built across the country or the world actually now. It's pretty amazing to see the earlier buildings.
Yeah. Well, he was a Philadelphia architect, and so much of his work was built in the area. The AFL was his only his only building in Center City has gone. And we're lucky that we have the Richards building on the Penn's campus, and that Penn is doing right by it now. It's a National Historic Landmark, so it's protected. The Esherick House, I'm just speaking to the buildings in the city because I think Save Our Sites really is thinking about within the city of Philly. The Esherick House is on the city register. The owners have gotten it as on a National Historic Landmark. I think they did that. So that's a building that has some important protections to it. So the masterworks, if you will, are protected, but there's still a lot of buildings. I think about the early synagogue from 1938 up in Oak Lane, that after the Jewish community left, it became a church. I think it's still a church. The facade was altered a bit. I've never been inside, so I don't know the state of that. The Irving Shaw House, it's on Cypress Street. That's in pretty good shape. It's got a really important facade element in a kind of paired set of double hung windows that are exaggerated in their scale, which creates a very interesting window onto the street. So the idea of glass and having a window onto the street is an interesting thing. But a young Bob Venturi saw that window and did something interesting with that in Mother's house and elsewhere. So that's an important little work that was really just a minor, some alterations and additions to the interior of that building, on Cypress Street. But I think that, the interior has been altered somewhat, but, that's not unexpected in a single family dwelling to
Right.
see a kitchen changed and things like that. It's sad when it happens, but it may be inevitable. But the last one I would just point out is the Pennypack Woods was George Howe, Oscar Stoneroff, and Lou Kahn, 1941, 42, 43, built, during World War II. That's still out there in the Northeast. The houses are still occupied. I don't think that's going anywhere, but everyone owns their house. So some of the kind of that sense of coordination and integration of facades and buildings. Everyone has their own paint palette and color and strategy for dealing with the aging of buildings, with aluminum siding and things like that. But the part I regret a little bit is everyone kind of is fenced off their backyards, whereas initially that was kind of a sense of common space. So that value of the use of the landscape, as kind of shared community space and as a space that is integral with defining the kind of character of a building or a landscape, or in how one welcomes human engagement and use, sometimes to better effect than others in their execution. Those are ones that I kind of think about are still there. They're still trudging along. They've seen quite a bit of change over time. And maybe we'll still see, yet more into the future. But it's good to reflect on things that have slipped from our contemporary engagement.
Do we have any last questions? All right, I will hand it over to David.
I have to thank Bill Whitaker again for marvelous discussion of Kahn's lost buildings in Philadelphia, but as I said, he's brought them back to life, and even a sense of materiality. You know, they have now a substance, at least in my mind. So I thank you for that. As I said, he's created a document that was recorded and will be issued on YouTube. So I thank you very much for a wonderful evening. Thanks for you all coming. It's getting a little late, so what will I say? Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thanks so much.